I had a little 63 Porsche, and I had my can on the passenger seat. And 54 miles was an hour, you know. And in those days, the freeways worked all the time. You could just drive up here in an hour. The guys at the Grace Brothers Brewery were nice to me. They were, it was obvious that it was a family company, which was really nice.
That's one of our proud components of Sonoma County Brewing is Grace Brothers, and the family's still in town doing their things. Ken, your hallmark is quality. You've got a QA program like no other. And, y'all should. I'm inviting all of you to go see his brewery in North Carolina at some point. It's a spectacle of brewing. But can you talk a little bit about the early years and what you did to drive that? I mean, even today with your staff, it's always quality, and
well, I think I'll echo what Fritz said, because when we started out, I didn't have a clue about commercial brewing. I was a home brewer, and although I was somewhat advanced as a home brewer, I didn't yeast management and wort variation, and had lots of issues. I called Fritz up pretty regularly, and Mark Carpenter and Gordon McDonough were always there to answer questions, and even at that point in time, I could call Coors. Coors was really helpful. I know they were really helpful. There were some malt concerns early in the day with recipes, and sort of leaned on a lot of brewers for guidance. And there were, back in those days, there were several brewery-focused laboratories that we don't have really today. Siebel was a pretty significant institution. Schwartz Services, I think it was just more than about those, and Wallerstein labs were that. And so there were places to go to talk to trained, retired brewmasters. And I remember actually we were having some fermentation issues when we started up, and I remember calling, and somebody at Siebel who got me in touch with an ale brewer, an old American ale brewer, retired guy from Valentine's, and talked yeast and wort aeration, and so I think from early on there was a lot of help around the industry.
I think it shows that camaraderie that's in our industry today. It started so early on with the foundation of the craft beer industry and beyond, as Fritz talked about.
Yeah, I mean the brewers helping brewers. The technical people, the sales guys don't always get along all that well, but the technical folks tend to be absolutely at the hand, and I know we got some malt for you.
Yeah, it's a good story. Can I tell that real quick? The nitrosamine, what was that, 79? Suddenly they discovered that nitrosamine was in beer because it was in malted barley, and nitrosamine is a carcinogen. The degree to which it's such is to be debated. But suddenly, a new machine was invented that measured in parts per billion. And suddenly there was 125 parts per billion in a typical beer. The Americans were in Germany when they found this out in a convention. And the Americans did immediately the right thing. They went to the telephone and they called their companies and said, we know something that you have to know. There's a carcinogen in beer, probably in our beer, and you need to call legal, tomorrow morning. And the industry went to work, the USBA went to work, they researched it, they found out that it came from the directly fired kilns that were drying the barley. Needless to say, it was big in Scotch whiskey, but their PR department was better than ours, and we didn't ever hear about that. It was a frightening thing because, bad news is news, and good news is never news. The media just loved it. And of course, there were 3 small brewers in America making all malt beer. Ken and me and Jack McCall. And our beers were never tested to our knowledge, but they would have been almost double the nitrosamine content of the beers that were not all malt. This was in barley. And I called a friend in the barley business, with malt business, that we'd gotten to know at the BAA conventions. He sold some malt to Coors as a broker. And we knew that Coors had no nitrosamine in their malt because it was made in indirectly fired kilns. The air was heated up in a heat exchanger, and so then warm air that had never been in a flame was sent through the malt. There was one other malt house in the world, like Red Wing in North Dakota or something. They all had 0 nitrosamine. And I was just about to begin brewing in my new brewery. That's why I know it was 79. It would have been July 79. And my friend Otto talked with Coors, and Coors agreed to sell us nitrosamine-free malt in rail cars. We had a railroad to the brewery in those days. I called Ken and Jack and I said, hey guys, I'm sure you've seen the nitrosamine. Oh yeah, well I've got nitrosamine-free malt. I'll sell it to you at my cost, which was above the normal cost, but of course was pretty good about it. And we all came out with 0 nitrosamine. I always used to imagine the guy at Anheuser-Busch who was testing all these beers from around the country. And he got Sierra Nevada, 0 nitrosamine. Not 122, not 19, not 0. It was a triumph. And nobody ever called, and we just escaped. Quite something.
So the last couple days being here, I've met a lot of new young brewers, and I definitely see a lot of fear in their eyes. They're in that rough stage, the first couple of years of business, and we've all been there. Do you guys have any memories of those? I mean, obviously you do. You don't always want to remember the bad times, but you certainly learn from them.
It gets better.
It does. Is this something that you could tell the audience that, just maybe a story that you remember that, probably at the time was a nightmare, and you look back now and if you got through it, you must probably have those stories. But, John,
everything went great. For me, of course, I'd come from a family that owned a restaurant, so I had a little experience of that. But that was, as you now found, sometimes the hardest part about it. Brewing beer was easy. Having 40 employees and trying to manage it all yourself, getting there first thing in the morning, leaving, last one to leave at night, all that stuff in those early years. Chris is not that.
Chris has 8 restaurants now, he's put it on himself.
For me, I guess the first couple of years were quite rough, and times are so different now. I think not that there's no challenges now. There's lots of challenges, I'm sure, but they're different than I think what we faced. Getting distribution was an excellent cost. I remember we had Consumers was our first distributor outside here. Texas building, and remember we sold 3 pallets of beer, and didn't hear anything back from them, and went down a few weeks later and said, we don't have any beer around here. Great, must have sold it. I'm looking in their warehouse, and here's 2 of the pallets still wrapped up, stuck behind some other stuff. They didn't do any selling, so you didn't have somebody on the street. They just had their beer in their catalog.
There's a reason why they call them distributors and not sellers. Well, I would just say this, that for any of you who are deep into it and struggling, it's just eventually I'm sure you'll come to see it the way I do. I'm just so grateful for the chance to have found an avocation. When people ask me if I miss the brewery, I say, well, I'll tell you this, I dream about it every night. And they look at me kind of with sympathy. But then I always say, but I always did dream about it every night. We used to say, if you're not having nightmares, you're not on the team. And I do, I have several dreams most nights. I had a wonderful dream last night about a group sort of like this, visiting a lot of breweries that had closed, sort of the Meisterbrau, Burgermeister type breweries, and touring through the breweries on a learning expedition. Why had they closed? And what had they done? And it was obvious that the beer was just tasteless, and that it was all about advertising and puffery and you know, girls, scantily clad girls on roller skates and stuff. And this whole group, which was like this group here, we were all just sort of stunned by the degree to which we realized that unless you have a product, it's all just silliness. You've got to have the product. And these people, none of them had a product. They were all just, you know, doing the lager type stuff that we saw. The first time I brought Angry Porter to the brewery convention in Fort Lauderdale, after lunch I noticed all around on these white tablecloths there were these huge big brown stains because these guys had poured our porter into the glass as though it was Leinenkugel lager, you know, with no head on it at all. And they had just foamed up and over out of the glass and made these huge big brown blotches all over the dining room. I just loved it.
Now, in those days, what were the hops like? You know, we're in this IPA revolution now. I'd love to hear from you.
Did you see the speaker's numbers, 1.3 pounds per barrel? Oh, I mean, when I got involved in brewing, that number would have been 0.25.
Yeah, 0.22 was the U.S. average back when we started. I mean, the hops, let's say, when I started going to Yakima in 1976, when I had a homebrew shop, I made the first track up there.
Is that when you got John hops, or did those come later?
I bought 101-pound brewer's cuts because I couldn't afford to buy a whole bale. And the varieties, I mean, they're volumes, they're a cluster, obviously. Cascade was a fairly new entry. Brewer's Gold, Earl Brewer.
Early cluster.
Early cluster, yeah. That was about it, I think. And it wasn't really, you know, and Fritz was, I think you supported the Northern Brewer probably because it was on the way. I think Tommy used early on. And then Bouillon being used, I think, as a dry hop by Falstaff, by Valentine's, pre-Falstaff. But there weren't really any aroma hops. And, you know, Cascade almost failed just because none of the major American brewers wanted a hop that was so different than their Germanic hops they were used to using for aroma hops, and so they didn't find favor.
We were the first brewer to use that. As far as we know, we used it in '75. A friend who was Uproar, you knew John Seaborn, recommended to me. He said, it's an experimental variety, Fritz, and I think it has an ale quality. And so we used Cascade. We might have used it in the first Liberty Ale in the spring of '75, but I know we used it in the old Foghorn Barley Wine and in the Christmas Ale in '75. So, and it, of course, I mean, it was obvious to us immediately. John knew his hops, and it was wonderful. I'm sure by now, Cascade may be his old hat, but at the time, it was kind of a revolutionary addition to some of our products.
And thanks to you and Anchor, and there's several of us in the room are buying hops from John Jr. Yeah, absolutely. And he speaks of giving tours at Anchor one summer. He was a tour guide apparently, John Jr. So he still has fond memories of Anchor for sure. So, how about you, John, buying hops at a group level?
Well, we were mostly going through Hop Union and Haas back then. Remember, Haas was also in the crawfish business.
Henry
Henry
Von Michael, he came to me in about '74 or '5, whenever the hop market went insane. And about 6 months before that, he said, Fritz, I think you should buy hop futures. I said, I've never done that. He said, well, talk to your grower and see if he'll book a good price for you. And I made $50,000. I mean, I saved 50 over the next year and a half on that price. And that was in the early 70s. That'd be the equivalent of several $100,000 today's number.
Yeah, real problems with the malt. To start, there weren't really any brew pubs. We were driving up near you, I can't remember quite the thing, but it was Great Western Malting. We'd have to pick it up in Corning, right? In a big flatbed. We'd rent a flatbed truck, drive up there, pick it up, lump it all the way back to our brewery, throw it where my office was supposed to be. Which is still bags of malt this high.
Great Western Malting had a barley storage facility in Corning, and I used to drive up there and borrow an auger and load the drums and bread it back. going back to the early days of hops. We're at sort of hop prices right now, sorts of, I would say prices, but certainly a big change in the industry. But it hasn't been the first one. I remember shortages, you mentioned late 70s, there was one in the early 80s where hop prices quadrupled. It went overnight, like 82 or 83, after not having a contract, and that was when we first started contracting, was the early 80s. We got caught short actually for us, and that's always some hops.
Oh, really good. Yeah, we used to do
How about, so in this day and age, we have, you can send out an email blast, you have Facebook, Twitter, I mean, I don't want to say it's easy for all the new guys in the ring, but that stuff didn't exist at the beginning. So was there a thought towards marketing beyond what goes in the liquid and in the bottle, or just cross your fingers and see how things
Well, people had to come to us, of course.
Yeah.
The group had the great things they did. We were very early on, of course. Brew pub business, so people, we were a regional business for years. It's, every day of the week we had somebody that wanted to start a brewery that was coming in to see us, to see our brewery. It was actually the first brew pub system in America that had unique tanks, professionally made. It wasn't a bunch of dairy tanks or yes. So that was their first full brewery, and the first time conicals had been used for a brew pub. So that was very interesting to brewers, and also just our operation. I think for some years I could see a little bit of triple rock, a lot of places around. It's fun. People like this guy comes in, he wants to start a brew pub up in Bend. Gary Fish, he's a friend of Dad's. We're friends. So he comes in, talks about it, brew pub, opens it up, and look at it today. It's kind of amazing what this little brew pub saw.
The shoes for those
right. Brendan Boylan, he was in line the first day we opened.
Do you remember Bauer Schweitzer?
Oh, I'm warning you, I'll tell you another story. We closed the brewery down for several months in the summer of '79 when we were moving. We had a great plan, but as everybody knows, plans are essential, but they don't work. And the plan was to start brewing in the new brewery and keep bottling the old brewery dry and then overlap. And then one magic day we'd move to the new brewery and start bottling there. And in fact, there were several months with no brewing and no bottling and no nothing, and the shelves were bare. And we didn't get any malt from Bauer Schweitzer. And then when we started up, we got it from Great Western, because they had come to me and said they'd like to have my business. Imagine. They took me to dinner and said they'd like to have my malt business. And Bauer Schweitzer. One day we went to get malt. We had these little wooden bins that had enough, 2 bins had enough malt for one brew. And they said, "Oh, we're closed." And we said, "Wait, what are you doing?" Well, they said, "The strike. All our workers are on strike. The breweries have all been getting malt for weeks and weeks. Haven't you gotten any malt?" I said, "Well, nobody told me about a strike." So there was no malt for a month or so. And so when we started up in the new brewery buying malt from Great Western, I just couldn't wait for Bauer Schweitzer to call me. Sure enough, one day he called, nice guy, he was into harness horses, remember him? Anyway, he said, "How's everything?" I said, "Great. How you doing?" "Good." "I hear you got the new brewery going." "Yeah, it's going great." "You gonna need any malt?" "Well, I don't think so. We're hooked up pretty well with Great Western." So that was a great pleasure.
That was right in the middle of North Beach, right?
Yeah.
It was kind of amazing, right in the middle of San Francisco.
It was an old remnant inner city industry.
And they had been, went through the earthquake and
Yep.
had been rebuilt the kilns.
Yep.
I got the kiln door off before it happened.
Did you? Yeah.
But
They had the big rotating drums.
Fritz, I remember at a party celebrating Sierra Nevada Anchor a few years back. You told a funny story about needing to try took some publicity for Anchor, and you drove with hops in your passenger seat.
Yeah, you know, a brewer, bless his heart, stole that story from me. I heard about it. But anyway, yeah, I lived on the edge of the Haight, and I bought the brewery in '65, so I was going back and forth during the great days of the Haight-Ashburn. And mind you, they weren't all great. It was a sad thing, and at its worst, it was really a sad thing. You know, young people just lost, spaced out, and staggering around. But it was fun. I mean, the whole thing was exciting. And I learned that hops samples came in little bricks, wrapped up. Do they still do this? Does anybody have the hop paper still? That went out of style, but I think we had special paper, do we?
They still
with the
do.
thumbtack, with the carpet tack?
Yep.
Oh, wonderful. Well, anyway, I just thought that looked exciting. A brick of that stuff. And so I used to put it on the seat of, again, my little 63 Porsche. I put it on the passenger seat with the paper open and the brick there kind of crumbled up. I'm driving through the Haight hoping to get arrested and make the papers, you know, brewer says, no, it's hops.
We made a bad marketing move once, and we had 3/4 of a bale of hops. I can't remember what brand it was. It had gone bad, so we couldn't use it. You know, back then you couldn't buy.
Oh man, they go bad when they're bad. They call it cheesy.
Right. So we made the dumb idea of having a hop fest. We spread it all over the floor of the pub, and everybody ran out of there sneezing. And then we cleaned it up, and for weeks the place just smelled. It all soaked in, all the oil soaked into the wood and gone rancid. It was
All right.
You know, that's one of the things I remember. Ken, I'll bet you remember too. When I go into a home brew shop today, I don't smell what I expect to smell. And the home brew shops all used to smell of cheesy hops, is what the term the trade used. You know, they get that sort of sickly sweet, funny smell. And nowadays, of course, they're sealed and they're it's a fantastic revolution for quality.
Home brewers get as good as what we get as a professional.
Well, when we started, I mean, the only option you could really get were those pink red bricks from Berry, which were forced used, and they were actually intended for making bread and worm farms, getting bacteria within the bread culture. I had years later, I caught him doing a little history of getting into the bricks, and he started selling in the homebrew trade because it was another outlet for his loss. He would, take like 5 or 10 cents a pound for the 2 or 3 year old.
Yeah, sure. Well, you know, that's why hops tend to do this weird cycle. It's one of the very few agricultural products in the world that has only one use. And so the crops come and go, and then the demand comes and goes, and every now and then they cross.
Well, I think at this point we want to open it up for some questions for Fritz, Ken, and John. So we want to use this